This is likely the most expensive fruit in history. Not this one specifically, I think it was $4.99, but pineapples in general. There was a time in the 18th century when a single pineapple in England could cost you the equivalent of $10,000 in today's money. They were so expensive that instead of purchasing them, many people would just rent them to show off. So today I am going to show off by making this 18th century recipe for a pineapple tart. So thank you to Magic Spoon for sponsoring this video as I make incredibly expensive pineapple tarts. This time on Tasting History. At this place we had many pineapples, sweet of singular goodness, in truth the most delicious fruit that can be found. That was Antonio Pigafetta, who sailed with Magellan around the world in the 1520s. And of all the new foods that he encountered on his journey, pineapples were among his favorite. But for the next 350 years, most Europeans would not get to enjoy the pineapple unless they were really, really rich. And that's why this English recipe from 1736 is so special. It's one of, if not the first recipe for a tart made with pineapples, and it came out shortly after the wealthier people in England started building pineries, which are basically greenhouses meant to grow pineapples. But at this time, most of the pineapples were still coming from abroad. Particularly in England, they were coming from Barbados. And that is why the recipe says to make a tart of ananas, or pineapple, from Barbados. Take a pineapple and twist off its crown, then pare it free from the knots and cut it in slices about ½ inch thick. Then stew it with a little Canary wine or Madeira wine and some sugar till it is thoroughly hot, and it will distribute its flavor to the wine much better than anything we can add to it. When it is as one would have it, take it from the fire, and when it is cool, put it into a sweet paste with its liquor and bake it gently a little while, and when it comes from the oven, pour cream over it, if you have it, and serve it either hot or cold. So the recipe is very simple. It's just pineapple, sweet wine, and sugar. And since I'm trying to watch my sugar intake, I am going to counteract this sugar bomb of a tart by eating the zero sugar added granola sent to me from today's sponsor, Magic Spoon. I've loved the cereals that Magic Spoon makes for years, and now they have this wonderfully crunchy granola packed with 13 grams of protein and 0 added sugars. Comes in delicious flavors like mixed berry, honey almond, or my favorite, peanut butter. Sometimes I'll eat it in a bowl with milk, or sometimes I'll just eat it plain. Good snack. Another great snack Magic Spoon now has is their line of treats, perfect for an on-the-go pick-me-up. They're packed with 11 to 12 grams of protein and only have 1 gram of sugar. And what I love most is their texture. They're crispy and yet airy, and so they're not stodgy like some protein bars are. So to give Magic Spoon a try, just click the link in the description or head to magicspoon.com/tastinghistory and use my code TASTINGHISTORY to get $5 off. Now you can also get Magic Spoon at stores or online on Amazon, but to get it here, you want to go to magicspoon.com/tastinghistory or just click the QR code and you'll get $5 off. And now it is back to our sugar bomb of a tart, which says that we need to have a sweet paste, basically pastry that is also made with sugar. And I was going to use some generic sweet paste, but I thought maybe this book actually has a recipe for it. And lo and behold, it says if you want to have a sweet paste, then take ½ pound of butter and rub it into about 1 pound of flour with 2 or 3 ounces of double refined sugar, powdered. And make it a paste with cold milk, some sack, and brandy. This is a very good one. So this recipe isn't generic at all. In fact, I think it's the first time that I've seen a tart dough recipe that has wine in it. So to make this tart dough, what you'll need is a ½ pound or 226 grams of butter, 3½ cups or 450 grams of flour, 3/4 cup or 85 grams of powdered sugar, a ½ cup or 120 milliliters of milk, then 2 tablespoons of brandy, and 2 tablespoons of whatever wine you're using for the filling. We'll discuss more about what wine to use when we get to the filling, but essentially it is a semi-sweet dessert wine. So first, whisk together the flour and powdered sugar, then rub the butter into the flour with your fingertips until it is well incorporated and you have a nice sandy texture. Then add the wine and the brandy and about half the milk and start to work the mixture until it begins to form a dough. If it's not coming together, you can add a little more milk until it does, but you may not need all of the milk. Once you have a dough, set it on the counter and knead it just a few times until you have no more bits of flour showing, and then gently flatten it out to about 1 inch thick, and then wrap it up and put it into the fridge for at least an hour to firm up. Once it's rested in the fridge, use a rolling pin to press on it until it softens enough to begin to roll it out, and then start to roll. Now this recipe actually makes quite a bit of dough. You could probably cut it in half because it's enough for 2 large tarts. And I decided to make smaller tarts, so I actually cut out pieces of the dough and then rolled those out about 1/8 of an inch thick and then lined my tart tins with that. There was enough dough to make probably 16 small tarts, but I'm not gonna have enough filling for that, so I ended up making, I think, 6 or 7. But once the tart tins are lined with dough, dock the bottom with a fork and then blind bake them by lining them with parchment and filling them with baking beads. Then they can go into the oven at 425 degrees Fahrenheit, 220 Celsius for 15 minutes. Then take them out, carefully remove the beads. I had a little more trouble with that than I would have liked, but once the beads are out, you can return the tarts to the oven for another 5 minutes or until the bottom of the tart is fully baked. Then take them out, let them cool as you prepare your filling, for which you will need 1 pineapple. Now I used a rather small pineapple. It's very sweet, but you can also use a bigger pineapple. It's just going to kind of mess with the ratios of how much liquid you want to add when we make our syrup, but it doesn't really matter what you use. Either way, chop off the top and the bottom of the pineapple and then remove the jagged rind, something described by the 17th century botanist John Parkinson as scaly like an artichoke, but more like to a cone of the pine tree, which we call a pineapple for the form. He seems not too impressed with the look of a pineapple, I guess, but when it came to the taste, he says it was as if wine, rosewater, and sugar were mixed together, so I suppose he was a fan in the end. Now once you've removed the rind, use a paring knife to pull out any of the remaining knots and then slice it into about 1/2 inch thick slices and remove the core. Also, if you are making smaller tarts like I am, then you actually should cut these up into smaller pieces. This is something I didn't realize until a little later in the process, but if you're making one large tart, then you can leave them as whole rings. Now we need to make the syrup, for which you will need 1 cup or 200 grams of sugar and a 1/2 cup or 120 milliliters of Malmsey wine from the island of Madeira. The recipe actually says you can use something either from the Canary Islands or Madeira, but today Madeira is going to be much easier to find, and Malmsey is great because it lends this wonderful golden color and is somewhat sweet, but not overpoweringly so it should be a nice complement to the pineapple. So first, dissolve the sugar into the wine. Then lay the pineapple in a pan and pour the sugar wine mixture over it and set it over medium-high heat. Let it come to a simmer and simmer it until the liquid has turned into a nice syrup and the pineapple has become quite soft, about 25 to 30 minutes. Once the pineapple is nice and soft, take it off the heat, let it cool for a while, and then spoon it into the tarts. Then you want to pour a bit of the syrup over as well. And if the syrup is not as thick as you'd like it to be, then you can leave it on the stove for a little longer to let it thicken up even more. It's going to make eating the tart less messy. Once filled, set the tarts in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 175 Celsius, and bake for 20 minutes or until the syrup is bubbling. And while the tart bakes, we can take a look at exactly how this rather simple pineapple tart became one of the most expensive desserts in history. Originally, the pineapple hails from South America, and the people of South America, Central America, and the Caribbean have eaten it since time immemorial. In the islands of the Southern Caribbean, the native people ate pineapples raw, roasted, dried, or even fermented into a sort of wine. And it was the pineapples of those people specifically that were the first to be encountered by the Europeans. On November 4th, 1493, on his second voyage to the New World, Christopher Columbus landed on an island which he named Guadalupe. And when his men came ashore, they found that the people on the island had fled their villages to go up into the mountains. And so, making themselves at home, they started walking around the villages, heading into the huts, and there the Spanish came across some fruit that looked like green pine cones, but were much larger. These were filled with solid pulp, like a melon, but were much sweeter in taste and smell. Now, some of the languages in this part of the world called them nanas, which means excellent fruit, and so that is where ananas comes from, which is how many languages call the pineapple today, but the Spanish, since they thought that they looked like pine cones, dubbed them piñas, and that is where we get pineapple. And so they took some of these pineapples back to Spain with them to present to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. The Italian Pietro Martire, who was present in Spain at the time, recorded that this fruit, which the king prefers to all others, does not grow upon a tree, but upon a plant, similar to an artichoke or an acanthus. I myself have not tasted it, for it was the only one which had survived unspoiled, the others having rotted during the long voyage. Spaniards who have eaten them fresh plucked where they grow speak with the highest appreciation of their delicate flavor. And with King Ferdinand's approval, the pineapple quickly became the king of fruits and the fruit of kings, at least in Spain. In England, they had Queen Elizabeth I, it required a more feminine moniker. And since Sir Walter Raleigh was hesitant to compare his queen directly to such a spiny fruit, he dubbed the pineapple the princess of fruits that grow under the sun. Alas, it does not seem that Queen Elizabeth ever actually got to see a pineapple with her own eyes, because at that time they were only making it to Spain. Partly this was because England didn't yet have a lot of territory in the Caribbean, whereas Spain had taken over plenty of it, but also Spain was much closer, so getting the pineapple all the way to England was much more difficult. It wasn't until 50 years after the Queen had died that the first pineapples came to England, and then they were from Barbados. These are the type that John Evelyn saw when he saw one presented to King Charles II in 1661. I first saw the famous Queen Pine brought from Barbados and presented to His Majesty, but the first that were ever seen in England were those sent to Cromwell House 4 years since. The Queen Pine was, and still is, one of the smaller varieties, but tends to be on the sweeter side, while a King Pine, much larger, tends to not be quite as sweet. But a few years after seeing the Queen Pine, John Evelyn also saw a King Pine in 1668 at a banquet that King Charles threw for the French ambassador. Standing by His Majesty at dinner in the presence, there was of that rare fruit called the King Pine growing in Barbados and the West Indies, the first of them I had ever seen. His Majesty cut it up and was pleased to give me a piece off his own plate to taste of, though he does say that it was not as sweet and delicious as some of the other varieties that he had had. Now, presenting this pineapple at the banquet to the French ambassador was not simply a nice gesture. Rather, it was a bit of gastronomic diplomacy. It was a way that the king could show the French that they now had the ability to get pineapples to England. One, they had the territory where they grew, and two, they had ships fast enough to bring them back to England before they'd rot. It's probably for a similar reason that Charles II had a painting commissioned which shows the accomplished gardener John Rose presenting the king with a pineapple. It is one of my favorite pieces of food-centric art. Some claim that the painting implies that Rose had actually figured out a way to grow pineapples in Britain, but if it was probably a one-off. For a larger European production of pineapples, we actually have to go to the Netherlands and give credit to the Dutch. It was in 1682 when the cloth merchant Pieter de la Court developed a greenhouse which could produce not one, but several hundred pineapples a year. And so it is no wonder when, in 1688, William of Orange left the Netherlands to take his place as King William III of England, he ordered large greenhouses to be built at his new home of Hampton Court Palace outside of London. These were filled with all sorts of tropical plants, including pineapples, that were imported not from the tropics, but from the Netherlands. At the same time, in France, King Louis XIV had fallen in love with pineapples, enjoying pineapple ice cream at the end of many meals. It was good for digestion. But his pineapples were still being imported from the Caribbean because the French pineries, where they grew pineapples, were not as successful as those in England and the Netherlands. It wasn't until 1733, when under his successor, Louis XV, the French would successfully grow pineapples in France. But even then, it was only 2 pineapples in that whole year. But with the success over the next few years, they built many new pineries at Versailles and at other locations in France, so that by the late 1730s, pineapples had become part of many meals throughout France and England, if of course you were exceedingly wealthy. Now, pineapples were no longer the domain of only royalty, but were available to all extremely wealthy aristocracy. And so it's around this time that you start to see pineapples everywhere. Not the actual pineapple, but images and depictions of the pineapple. They appear in paintings from the period, and they were printed on fabrics. There were plates and silverware and furniture and handbags that were often made in the shape of pineapples. They were incorporated into architecture too, above doorways and ceilings and upon columns. Then there is the 4th Earl of Dunmore, who topped his summer house with a massive pineapple-shaped cupola, something I would love to see the next time that I am in Scotland. Of course, these ways of displaying pineapples were a lot more permanent than actually having a pineapple which would rot. And in some cases, it was actually less expensive because at this time, a single hothouse pineapple cost about 80 pounds to produce. That's around $3,000 in today's money, and then they could be sold for between $8,000 and $10,000 in today's money. So at this time, most people now knew what a pineapple looked like, seeing as they are appearing all over the place. But with the price of a pineapple being what it was, very few people actually knew what it tasted like. As the philosopher David Hume wrote, "We cannot form to ourselves a just idea of the pineapple without actually having tasted it." And so pineapples became a symbol of opulence and the upper classes. Sometimes this was a positive symbol, and sometimes a negative symbol. Many political cartoons from the time castigated the rich for their indifference to the poor by showing them eating pineapples while those around them were starving. And a character in George Walker's 1799 novel, The Vagabond, poses the question, what right has one man to eat a pineapple, for which he gave a guinea, when another is starving for want of a halfpenny worth of bread? Answer me this. And so it's clear that very few people could ever hope to afford a pineapple of their own. But that didn't mean that they couldn't still use it as a symbol, as a way to kind of show off for other people. And this is where our society has really not changed that much in the last 250 years. Because today, if you can't afford to fly on a private jet, you can actually rent the inside of a private jet. Sometimes it's literally not even a functioning jet, but just rent the inside of a private jet to take pictures in so you can show off to other people. And they did the same thing with pineapples. If you couldn't afford a pineapple of your own, you could rent one to just carry around with you or else set on your table for a dinner party. The same pineapple could go around to different parties night after night after night before finally being purchased at full price by someone who could actually afford to eat it. Now the problem with this very expensive item, pineapple, was not only that most people couldn't get it, but also it encouraged pineapple larceny. In 1807, for instance, John Godding, alias Godwin, was indicted for feloniously stealing on the 25th of June 7 pineapples. In the proceedings at the Old Bailey, the victim of this heinous act was questioned as to how he came to learn of the crime. "I was informed by my servant. I went to the pine house about 9 o'clock in the morning. I found the door going into the garden had been broken open, and I saw that one of the front lights of the pine house had been taken out, and that someone had entered the pine house." Question: how many pineapples were gone? About 30 in all. 2 of them were ripe, and some were not ripe, and others were green. He suspected his former gardener of the crime, and so he and his current gardener went to find the scoundrel and tracked the villain down to Covent Garden, where they found the purloined pineapples. And the current gardener actually recognized one of the pineapples as his own, for he said it was a singular one. "I had never seen the like before." I don't think I've ever paid such close attention to any piece of fruit that I could identify it when put in a lineup of other fruits, but then again, I've never had a fruit that cost the same as a used car. Now, pineapples remained a coveted item through the reign of George IV, who served at his coronation banquet a prize-winning pineapple weighing in at a whopping 10.5 pounds. But by the mid-19th century, the mystique around the pineapple had begun to wane because, due to shipping advancements, the pineapple had become available to the middle classes, at least for viewing, if not for tasting. In 1872, a Mr. J. Robson, gardener to the Viscount Holmesdale, lamented that although a noble pine is an ornament to any table, it becomes rather commonplace when it is seen too often, and I have heard of one going the round of a series of West End dinner parties for some weeks. And the price of the pineapple continued to fall more and more as they began to be grown throughout the rest of the world. And in 1901, when the Dole Plantation opened in Hawaii, the pineapple became available to pretty much everyone who wished to have them. Now that story, the pineapple-fueled takeover of the Hawaiian Islands, really deserves its own entire episode. It's a very interesting story, so I will stop there and double back to 1736 when I can taste this wonderful pineapple tart. So as soon as you take the tarts out of the oven, you can either let them cool or you can pour a little cream over the top, and here we are, the luxurious pineapple tart of 1736. I've let mine cool down a bit because the syrup was still so liquidy that it just kind of became a mess, and now the syrup has firmed up. It's about at room temperature. So here we go. That is so good. Oh my gosh. That is phenomenal. I mean, it tastes like pineapple, obviously, but the addition of stewing it in the wine makes it so much more complex. There are only three ingredients in the filling recipe, and yet it's such a complex flavor. It's so interesting. That is so good. You don't really even need the tart portion. That said, the crust is really nice. I don't know how the wine changed it. I don't know that I can taste it, but it held together really well. Perfect for this type of tart where you kind of just want to eat the insides, where it's more of a container. But man, that is so good. I mean, honestly, even if you just made the filling and maybe served it with some like cream or whipped cream, that is so worth doing. I do think that the wine that you choose will have a huge effect on the flavor, but I don't think you can go wrong as long as it's semi-sweet or sweet, and it should be white or like a golden color, because otherwise it's not going to be a pretty dish. But even now, even when it's firmed up, the syrup is still pretty liquidy. But it's so good. You know what? That syrup put into like a cocktail, oh man, that'd be really good. Also, while I was working on this, I was reminded of, if you know the musical Cabaret, there were times in history when pineapples again became difficult to get for many, many reasons, but Cabaret, which takes place during the end of the Weimar Republic in Germany, there's a whole song about pineapples because this man who owns a fruit stand gets a pineapple for his lady love, and she says, like, if you brought me diamonds, if you brought me pearls, they wouldn't compare to this pineapple. A pineapple for me. It's such a cute song, so go look it up. Cabaret, wonderful show. And make this, because it's not that hard. You don't even need the crust. You can, crust is good, but I'll see you next time on Tasting History.